The European Union has announced the immediate launch of an EU military mission to help bolster French and African forces that have so far failed to end months of Christian-Muslim violence in the Central African Republic. In January, the UN Security Council approved a resolution that allows for action against individuals and groups that undermine the peace or stability in CAR. It also promised sanctions for any action which threatens or impedes the political transition process. The resolution also gave European troops the right to use force to protect civilians. Well, with me here in our studios, Ibrahima Diani, my colleague from BBC Afrique. And Ibrahima, what more do we know about the mission? How many troops, for example?
The announcement talks about between 800 to 1,000 troops to be deployed in CAR. I think it's an important number coming from the EU and also mark a kind of global involvement, attention to CAR situation, which is good news for the CAR president who was in France today.
But given the levels of violence there and how widespread it is, some might say that's really not going to be enough.
Yeah, but you already have about 2,000 French troops and also 6,000 African troops in the. I think the issue in CAR is how you can make these numbers effective locally, because you didn't have that amount of persons, troops deployed in the early situation of Mali, for example, but they were effective because, but here you have small militias fighting, sporadic fighting each other. So that makes things more challenging for some of the troops. And if you take into account that in the African troops, you also have the Chadian, for example, troops, which are not well perceived, well accepted by some of the Central Africans. Then it makes the situation even much worse.
And the situation is getting worse, isn't it? We've heard from the French president today a warning that the security situation is degenerating, Muslims being directly targeted.
And that's, it's good that he's mentioning that now, but this has been going on for weeks now, that the Muslims have been directly targeted, and this has caused a lot of Muslims living CAR, even though they are Central Africans. And I read a few weeks back that you had 15%. We used to have 15% of Central African Muslims. Because of this number is going down and down and down. Some even talking about less than 10% now. So this is a big situation for in the year where we are celebrating the Rwandan genocide, 20 years of the end of Rwanda genocide. I think the situation will require much more attention, and I think tomorrow, this is why now the EU intervention will be a great asset for the international community there.
Ibrahima, thank you very much for coming into the studio to talk this through. Thank you. Now, since the conflict in South Sudan flared up last December, more than 800,000 people have been displaced in the country. A further 250,000 refugees have crossed into neighbouring states seeking shelter and food. And the refugee traffic is two-way, with South Sudan also hosting more than 200,000 refugees from Sudan in camps close to conflict areas. Many people are cut off from aid. The fighting means they can't farm in order to feed themselves. So let's look at that issue. We can talk now to the UNHCR High Commissioner Antonio Guterres in Juba in South Sudan, where he's been with the World Food Programme on an operation to airlift supplies to more remote areas. Thank you very much for joining us, and give us an idea, please, what you have witnessed, what you've seen.
Well, it is a tragic situation. Today, in a remote area, as you mentioned, I met two young men. They were with me in 2005 in Uganda in a refugee camp. And they were preparing to come back to South Sudan after the comprehensive peace agreement. We helped about 500,000 people come back home to South Sudan. And now we are witnessing again these same people fleeing the country. And it is absolutely essential to bring peace to South Sudan, because if the war goes on for a few more months, with the rainy season coming, I believe that we will be facing a catastrophic humanitarian situation.
Do you think there are many areas that are close to famine?
There are many areas where there is no access. Today, because of the parties to the conflict, tomorrow the rainy season will make most of the roads impossible to use. And at the same time, we feel the suffering of the people. These people came back after 20 years in exile with hope, with joy. I witnessed twice when they were coming back to South Sudan. These same people now is forced to flee. These same people now is suffering enormously with very difficult access to the basic things that are essential for life. I believe that the international community needs to come together and needs to put pressure on the parties to make sure that they're able to forge peace. And at the same time, we cannot forget the tragedy of the South Sudanese people. I understand that Crimea, Syria are today much more in the international agenda, but this is a people that has suffered enormously, a very resilient people. This is a country that I believe still has a future, but they need, at the present moment, massive international solidarity.
We've just been talking about the crisis in Central African Republic. We're also covering South Sudan, what's been happening there since December. And it seems that your message to the outside world is this is a tipping point. This is a really dangerous time for this country. And even with all these competing crises, you're asking for more attention to be paid.
The international community has made a huge investment for South Sudan to become independent, and then a huge investment for the country to be able to start its development process. Unfortunately, all that can be lost now. So this is not the moment to leave the South Sudanese alone. This is the moment to express them solidarity. But the most important thing is to create conditions for the parties to forge peace. There is today a very important discussion in the world about war crimes and the need for those war crimes to be seriously taken by the international community. But when one comes to South Sudan, one understands that the worst of the crimes is war in itself.
High Commissioner, thank you very much for your time.